I would like to welcome you all to this event on the occasion of the launching of the new OECD report on economic benefits of air quality improvements in the Arctic Council countries. My name is Einar Gunnarsson, and I am Iceland's ambassador of Arctic Affairs and the chair of the senior Arctic officials. My warm welcome from us here on the Icelandic Arctic Council chairmanship team and our appreciation for our colleagues at the OECD who are the organizers of this event. Now we have 1 hour ahead of us, and as we are still working out the last technical details of connections, I will start the introduction. Just a couple of words on the Arctic. The Arctic is a vital region that helps preserve the balance of the global climate. The Arctic environment is particularly sensitive to short-lived climate pollutants, including black carbon, due to their strong warming effect. With ambitious policy action to reduce air pollutants, the Arctic Council countries would obtain a positive effect on health and the environment throughout their territory, while also helping to slow down climate change by reducing emissions of black carbon. In this context, the new OECD report that we are launching today calls for ambitious policy action to reduce air pollution in Arctic Council countries, highlighting the environmental, health, and economic benefits from policy action. Now, today's event, we will start today's events with opening remarks from Mr. Rudolfo Lacey, Director of the OECD Environment Directorate, and we will then hear some opening remarks from His Excellency Mr. Guðlaugur Þór Þórðarson, Iceland's Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Development Cooperation, and the current chair of the Arctic Council. This will then be followed by a presentation of the report by Mr. Shardul Agrawala, head of the Environment and Economy Integration Division in the OECD Environment Directorate. The presentation will give way to a discussion with the current and incoming chairs of the expert group on black carbon and methane, and the Finnish representative to that group during Finland's chairmanship period before Iceland. And these are Mr. Karle Kuppinen from Finland, Ms. Kristin Linda Árnadóttir from Iceland, the current chair of the GPCM, and Ms. Veronika Ginsberg from Russia, the incoming chair of the GPCM. Finally, we will have a Q&A session so that you can ask questions on this fascinating topic. For the Q&A session, I have two of the authors of the report to join other speakers to answer more technical questions, and those are Mr. Sig Clement from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis and Ms. Rita van Dingenen from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. And for making those questions or comments, we will be inviting you to use the Q&A chat function, and they will then be brought on to me through the assistance of people working with us on both ends, both in Paris and here, and I will pose the questions to our panelists. But I would first like to invite Mr. Rudolfo Lacey, the Director of the OECD Environment Directorate, to give some opening remarks. Mr. Lacey, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Dear Minister Thordarson and dear Ambassador Gunnarsson, ladies and gentlemen, please let me extend our welcome to all of you for this webinar, where we are launching this important OECD report on the economic benefits of air quality improvements in Arctic Council countries. I have here the printed copy of the report. You can download the report now in our web pages. And we are honored, we are very happy to have had the support of the Arctic Council in the development of this report, and to be able to bring our expertise into the discussion on the need to scale up policies to protect the Arctic. The OECD provides a unique forum for environmental policymakers to discuss problems, share best practices in environmental policies, and also to compare progress on the actions that we are taking on climate, on biodiversity, that are environmental emergencies that are affecting the world. You know that the OECD has worked on policy scenarios to estimate the benefits and economic consequences of policy action for many decades. Since the early 90s, we have also informed our policy advice through our in-house global environment economy modeling. You may remember that in 2016, we published a global modeling analysis which showed that policy inaction on air pollution would lead to an increased number of air pollution related deaths and illnesses, as well as additional healthcare costs, lower labor productivity, and losses in agricultural production. So this would in turn result in lower economic growth and welfare. That's why this is a very important topic. The report that we are launching today brings an important additional step, looking at the benefits of policy action at a regional level. This new report focuses on Arctic Council countries, quantifying the economic benefits from improving air quality, but also highlighting the important climate benefits from reducing emissions of short-lived climate pollutants in this fragile region. The welfare benefits of reducing premature deaths would amount to $280 billion US, while the macroeconomic costs of the policies are basically zero, and the climate benefits are really significant. In addition, policy action could contribute to the well-being of people, drastically decreasing the share of those living in areas with PM 2.5 concentration, a very dangerous pollutant that exceeded the World Health Organization guidelines from 18 million to only 1 million. The interaction between air pollution and climate change is a fundamental point, as air pollution policies can also contribute to reduce anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases. I was talking about short-lived climate pollutants too, facilitating a pathway towards net zero emissions by the middle of the century. Arctic Council countries can lead the way in their policy action to address emissions of black carbon, the most relevant short-lived climate pollutant. Hopefully, their policy targets will be of inspiration to other countries that also contributed to polluting the Arctic through transboundary air pollution. The report that we are launching today is also very timely in the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has devastated human and economic toll across the world. Addressing global environmental issues while seeking to rebuild the economies and enhancing resilience against future shocks is more important than ever. To sum up, improving air quality is fundamental for human health, well-being, as well as the environment. We at the OECD are really delighted that we could contribute to highlight that increased policy action on air pollution that has significant economic benefits. We hope that this will help Arctic Council as well as other countries scale up their policy action on air pollution and climate change. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Director Lacey. We now move over to Minister Þórðarson. We have had some technical difficulties in getting the proper link up there. So don't be fooled if you, like me, are seeing the name Þórarinsdóttir under the minister while he is talking. That is a technical workaround to get the connection going. And also in on our end, the picture of the minister is somewhat smaller than it should be, but that is, I think, an effect of the technical workaround. So with that, I give the floor over to Minister Guðlaugur Þór Þórðarson, who will deliver opening remarks. Minister, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Director Lacey and ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of the OECD report of the economic benefits of air quality improvement in the Arctic Council countries, which is co-organized by the OECD and the Icelandic chairmanship to the Arctic Council. The work on the report was, of course, initiated at Finland's request during their chairmanship of the Arctic Council in 2017 to 2019. And it is obvious by now what profound effects climate change has on the Arctic region. The Arctic warms at 2 to 3 times the global rate, and Arctic warming trends are expected to continue towards mid-century. This calls for strong global action to reduce emission to mitigate these changes. That holds true for the Arctic too, because what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. In our efforts to fight climate change, we must put strong emphasis on the core mandate of the Arctic Council, and Iceland, over at reaching priority during our chairmanship, sustainable development, and strike a careful balance of its 3 pillars: social, economic, and environmental sustainability. The Arctic Council and its working and expert groups have a strong role to play in facilitating cooperation and informing policy on climate change. Here, I would like to mention the expert group on black carbon and methane, which during Iceland's chairmanship has been chaired by Kristín Linda Árnadóttir, the Deputy CEO of Landsvirkjun, the national power company of Iceland. I believe she is here with us today, along with the representatives of the former and incoming chairmanship of the expert group on black carbon and methane. Despite generating just 10% of global black carbon emission, Arctic states are responsible for around 30% of black carbon's warming effects in the Arctic, due to greater warming impact of local emission sources. The Arctic states are uniquely positioned to slow down warming in the region caused by emission of black carbon. However, action by non-Arctic states is just as important, as black carbon emission can be transported long distances. In 2015, the ministers of the Arctic states adopted the Enhanced Black Carbon and Methane Emission Reduction, an Arctic Council framework for action. There, the Arctic states committed to taking enhanced national and collective action to accelerate the decline in their overall black carbon emission and to significantly reduce their overall methane emissions. We are now well on our way to achieve those targets. However, there is always room for improvement. To help implement these commitments, the expert group on black carbon and methane was established. The expert group was tasked with developing a biannual summary of progress and recommendation based on national reports. Under Iceland's lead, the expert group will submit its 3rd summary report at the ministerial meeting in Reykjavik next month. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the OECD report launched here today will be extremely beneficial for the Arctic Council work on black carbon, while also complementing the Council framework for action on black carbon and methane. A collaborative policy action is needed to reduce air pollution in the Arctic. It could contribute to slowing down climate change in the Arctic, while also achieving great health and economic benefits. I would like to thank and congratulate the team at the OECD for a timely and immensely important report. It shines a light on the need to reduce air pollution in the Arctic and how setting air quality policies could result in better and healthier Arctic region for the 4 million inhabitants living in and working in the Arctic. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for your thoughtful remarks and encouragement on this work. I would now like to move over to the report itself, and it is a very impressive body of work. I have a copy with me that I have been looking at, and also the policy highlights taken out of that. And I would like now to invite Mr. Shardul Agrawala to present the main findings of the report on the economic benefits of air quality improvements in Arctic Council countries. So, Mr. Agrawala, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gunnarsson. And good afternoon, greetings to all of you, whichever time zone you're in. I'm going to share my screen now. I hope you can all see my screen. So coming straight to the context and motivation for the report, I think both the ambassador and the minister already highlighted the fact that the Arctic region is vital to preserving the balance of the global climate. It's also been mentioned that this region is also very fragile and sensitive to short-lived climate pollutants, most notably black carbon. And in this context, the Arctic Council countries adopted the aspirational goal to reduce black carbon emissions by 25 to 33% relative to 2013 by 2025. So this issue is very much a high-level policy priority in the Arctic Council countries. Within this broad context, what we are trying to do in this report is answer two big questions. So the first question is, are we on track? And obviously, the first part is relative to the black carbon aspirational goal, but we also want to address the issue of what is happening to other air pollutants under currently legislated policies. The second question is, what are the social and economic consequences of raising the ambition on action in terms of reducing a wide suite of air pollutants? And this could be done by deploying best available techniques. And it could also be done by involving countries beyond the Arctic Council countries. So this would be notably the observers to the Arctic Council, but of course also we have done modeling to look at what if the entire world participates in ambitious action. So that's the context of the report. Now, in terms of how we went about answering these questions, we have developed an integrated modeling framework where we first start with projections of economic activity and the economic drivers of air pollution. And this is done through our in-house modeling tool, which is a global computable general equilibrium model, ENV linkages. That information is linked to the GAINS model of the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis to get to emissions of a wide range of air pollutants. And from there, we link to the TM5 FAST model of the European Commission Joint Research Center to get to concentrations of ground level ozone and fine particulate matter. And from there, we go to the impacts on agriculture, on public health most notably, and then to look at economic consequences. So this is this innovative linked modeling setup where we are also drawing heavily on the expertise of our collaborators, particularly YASA and the Joint Research Center, and also the expertise of groups like the Expert Group on Black Carbon and Methane and the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. So this work is really building on this depth of regional expertise that is coming from the groups that I just mentioned. Now, I'll go straight to the key findings and just do a deep dive on 5 of the key conclusions. So coming to the first question, are current policies in Arctic Council countries on track? So according to the projections that we present in the report, if you look at the trend on in terms of black carbon emissions, so here we have indexed the emissions to 1 in 2013, which was the reference year for the aspirational goal. And if we project out to 2025, which is not too far ahead in time, our estimation is 21% reduction. And of course, some of, there's some uncertainty depending upon modeling assumptions. So by and large, it seems that the Arctic Council countries are largely on track or close to meeting their initial aspirational goal. Now, if you look at other pollutants, so now we're moving beyond black carbon and we're looking at projections of carbon monoxide, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide. And those pollutants are also projected to decline in this time period. But if you look at methane, that's continuing to trend up. And of course, this is 2025, which now is only 4 years away. We also wanted to look at what happens over the longer term. And this is the pattern over the longer term. So many of the declines, you will notice, will tend to flatten out in the second half of this time period, so between 2025 and 2050. And there's also a flattening out of the growth in methane emissions, but nevertheless, methane emissions would be about 14% above the 2013 levels by 2050. So this is what's happening as a result of policies which are already in place in the Arctic Council countries. So the next question is, can Arctic Council countries do more? And the resounding answer in this report is yes. If they deploy best available techniques, it can lead to significantly higher and longer term reductions. So this is the same information that I presented in the previous slide. Relative to 2013 levels, what happens to the emissions in 2025 for the air pollutants mentioned in the chart. So this is as a result of current policies. But if best available techniques are applied, then for black carbon, we could get as much as a 64% reduction by 2025. And in methane, instead of methane emissions going up, we could actually have a drop in methane emissions. And this is the figure for 2025. And obviously, the declines are even more pronounced if we extend the horizon all the way to 2050. So then the question is, okay, the ambitious action is feasible, but what are the benefits? What are the social benefits of ambitious action? And I'll present to you some results focusing on the public health dimension. So according to our projections, as a result of applying these best available technologies, 17 million people, 17 million less people in Arctic Council countries would be exposed to PM2.5 concentrations above the WHO guidelines of 10 microgram per meter cubed by mid-century. So under current policies, you'd have 18 million people exposed to these levels of PM2.5 concentrations by mid-century. And under the ambitious policy scenario, you would have 1 million. So 17 million people less, or an 18-fold decrease in the exposure of the population to concentrations above 10 micrograms per meter cube. Exposure, of course, is not everything. We also looked at reduction in premature deaths. And according to our estimations, 80,000, there'll be 80,000 less premature deaths due to air pollution annually by mid-century if we go for the ambitious policies relative to the current policies. And so 4 out of 10 premature deaths due to air pollution could be avoided each year by mid-century. That's overall for the Arctic Council countries. And here you have the shares and the absolute numbers looking at Canada, Russia, the Nordic countries taken together, and the United States, or which totals up to it's more than 80,000 deaths annually. And finally, it's not just about premature mortality. There are a number of other health-related impacts, which we have also quantified in terms of the benefits of ambitious action. So 3 million days of asthma symptoms avoided in children by mid-century, 100,000 hospital admissions avoided by mid-century, 139 million restricted activity days avoided, 330,000 cases of bronchitis in children avoided by mid-century. So these are all very powerful numbers, just looking at the health impacts. But now let's look at the economic case. So some of these avoided health impacts contribute to improved labor productivity. Another set of impacts relate to improved agricultural productivity if we reduce air pollution. And those impacts, those reduced impacts, drive the economic benefits resulting from these policies. And this is our quantification of the benefits of ambitious action for the 4 groups of countries that I mentioned earlier: Canada, US, Russia, and the Nordic countries. Now, of course, we have to look at the cost side of it. Implementing best available technologies is not a free lunch, and there are costs, investment costs, also putting these technologies and using them. There are costs associated with it, and these are the macroeconomic costs related to the deployment of these technologies. The bottom line message is in the crosses that you see. I mean, you would see that there is heterogeneity in the mix of costs and benefits across the different Arctic Council members. But the bottom line message here is that overall for the Arctic Council countries, the net economic cost, so if you take the benefits and subtract the costs, are close to zero. So there is no negative impact on economic growth as a result of undertaking such significantly ambitious policy action. But of course, GDP only captures market costs. And there are a number of other costs on social welfare, which are not quantified in the metric that I mentioned. And here we have quantified the welfare gains in per capita in the different Arctic Council countries as a result of ambitious action. So putting as value to the lives saved, putting a value to illness avoided, and so on. And these are the numbers. We've expressed them on a per capita basis because the population sizes are obviously very different across the Arctic Council members. And the total figure of the welfare benefits is close to $300 billion by 2050. Now, the final point I'd like to discuss is what about other benefits of scaling ambition beyond the Arctic? So scaling ambition could be taken 2 ways. One is by addressing both air pollution and climate in an integrated manner. And secondly, by engaging the observer countries and the rest of the world also to undertake policy action. So the result of this thought experiment I'll present to you. First, this is if we undertake ambitious action within the Arctic Council countries alone, and you see the reductions in both the greenhouse gases and air pollutants. And now in yellow, what you have is if integrated climate change and air policy action is taken in all countries. And you see, again, the impact is much more significant. So this is the case for trying to leverage action, perhaps through the Arctic Council, but engaging a broader set of countries in and perhaps moving towards global action on both climate change and on air pollution. So those are the findings in a nutshell. And before I conclude, I just wanted to thank the core team of experts who undertook the work. The OECD modeling team led by Lisa Lanzi, Daniela Stale-Belribas, Marta Arbinola, and Jean Chateau. The team at YASA led by Zig Clement and his colleague Chris Hayes, and Rita van Dingen from the European Commission Joint Research Center. And finally, I'd like to acknowledge the EU-funded action on black carbon in the Arctic, for their support in developing the scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Agravala. These are indeed some very impressive findings, very impressive body of work that you have pulled together here and also communicated in a very clear and understandable manner. And I simply want to acknowledge that it is often a challenge to come forward with such a careful and understandable communication of as impressive work as that you are doing. So just to express my happiness for that as well. Now I think we should move over to sort of preparing for the open discussions, and we have asked representatives of the previous, current and incoming chairmanships to be with us here. I'm referring to the expert group on black carbon and methane that has been working as a separate body within the Arctic Council since during the Canadian, the US chairmanship. I think we could even go a little bit further back and acknowledge the important work that took place under the Canadian chairmanship with the task force on this same topic. And all of this has resulted in some very strong focus on these matters within the Arctic Council. I think we can acknowledge especially the strong leadership from Finland on this front during the Finnish chairmanship. So I would be very happy to invite Mr. Kalle Kupeinen, who was Finland's representative to ETBCM during the chairmanship period of Finland, to be the first one and give some remarks, short remarks on the introduction of the report and other things you might find important. So, Mr. Kupeinen, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you warmly for the invitation to give this commentary on behalf of the Finnish government. The OECD project Economic Consequences of Reducing Black Carbon Emissions in the Arctic Region was indeed initiated during the Finnish chairmanship of the Arctic Council, and we facilitated the discussions between the OECD and the Arctic Council during the scoping phase of the study and supported the necessary decisions on both sides to enable its eventual initiation within the OECD. We would also like to express our gratitude for Iceland to continue the support during your chairmanship. And it's great to be in this occasion and nice arrangements as we see. Finland has followed with great interest the work, and we have been sponsoring it within the OECD as part of our voluntary contributions to the OECD. And many of you probably already have noticed that reducing emissions of black carbon and methane are priorities for Finland, and much so because of their impacts to the Arctic. So scientific assessments show that they can play an important complementary role to carbon dioxide reductions in the climate arena, and the emission reductions also result in clean air benefits. And Finland is and will actively promote concrete solutions for further emission reductions. Now we see a clear connection of this work with the Arctic Council framework for action on enhanced black carbon and methane emission reduction that was, as mentioned by the chair, decided upon by the Arctic Council in 2015. And obviously, as mentioned already by previous speakers, there's a clear connection to the quantitative collective goal to reduce emissions of black carbon as was decided in 2017. And we see that the OECD study that we have now heard about supports particularly the Arctic Council framework's call for scientific information on the cost aspects of the mitigation policies. So the results, as we have heard, give ground and additional arguments to work towards further accelerated action. The main outcomes, in our opinion, are the economic consequences of air pollution, and particularly the consequences of emission reductions of black carbon as part of airborne fine particles. Now, from mitigation point of view, we found the conclusion that ambitious emission mitigation policies can be implemented without affecting economic growth, very interesting and encouraging for our work. That indeed, additional investment in emission reduction technologies by firms and households seem to be of similar magnitude with the air pollution benefits as measured by better labor and agricultural productivity and lower health expenditures. So this would lead to a neutral GDP impact. Already there we have grounds for action. But additionally, the study found that ambitious air pollution policies result in significant welfare gains. So in other words, the benefits clearly outweigh the costs when we move beyond GDP and explore the welfare impacts in terms of changes in air pollution related illness and mortality. Now, these are quite strong arguments to move forward with ambitious mitigation policies, aren't they? Worth noting is that later this year, after the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in May, the Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program, AMAP, will publish a major scientific assessment of short-lived climate forces in the Arctic. As mentioned by Dr. Agravala, the OECD and the AMAP teams have cooperated during the process, and we think that this OECD report supplements very well also the comprehensive assessment that will be published by AMAP soon. With these words, I would warmly like to welcome and thank and to congratulate the OECD team and the collaborating institutes for conducting this very interesting study. We are confident that it will serve well the Arctic community in its science and knowledge-based decision-making, and without doubt be utilized by many of us for the benefit of the Arctic region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kupiainen. And again, let me acknowledge the strong contribution from Finland on this topic, and in particular in initiating this work being undertaken by the OECD. Now I would like to invite Ms. Kristín Linda Árnadóttir, the current chair of the EGBCM, as we call the expert group on black carbon and methane in the Arctic Council, to take the floor and give her remarks on this topic. Ms. Árnadóttir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador and Minister, Director, ladies and gentlemen. It's very enjoyable to be here with you today. And I would just like to start by thanking the OECD for this very important report on the economic benefits of air quality improvements in the Arctic Council countries. The OECD report outlines very well why ambitious policy actions are needed to reduce a wide range of air pollutants, and showing the positive effects on health and the environment, and of course the economic benefits. Though black carbon and methane are of course of particular concern for the Arctic, the impact of these emissions on human health and climate are of course of global concern. We all need to address this urgent issue and have a collective response to reduce emission, having in mind the importance of the Arctic and our responsibility towards the Arctic and its environment and its people. As the Minister and more mentioned, the expert group on black carbon and methane was established to review, analyze and assess the progress towards a common vision to reduce the emission of black carbon and methane. And we have the collective goal since 2017, which is an aspirational goal to reduce black carbon emission by 25 to 33% relative to 2013 levels by 2025. And to focus the work towards reaching these goals, the expert group works in 6 priority areas. It is the mobile and stationary diesel powered sources, oil and gas, residential combustion, solid waste, agriculture and animal husbandry, and management of wildfires. So you can see a clear connection with the OECD report that we're discussing now and with the priority areas that the expert group has. But within these priority areas, we are giving recommendations that are sort of like a set of options for Arctic states and observer states to consider in designing their own specific policies, taking into account, of course, the national circumstances and needs. And it's important to note that the expert group focuses predominantly on national and international policies and action related to mitigation of black carbon and methane emission. However, across all Arctic states and all, of course, in observer states and other states, significant work is being done by states, provinces, territories, regional bodies, municipalities, and indigenous communities to reduce emissions. The main deliverable of the expert group is the biannual summary report that is given to the minister on the progress of the work to reach the collective goal. As emission of the black carbon and methane outside of Arctic countries contribute both Arctic and global warming, observer states have been invited to join the Arctic states in effort to reduce the emissions. And I would like to use the opportunity to thank the 9 Arctic Council observer states, that is France, Germany, India, Italy, Japan, Poland, Spain, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom, who contributed to this work by sending in their national report, as well as the European Union, and also taking part very actively in the work of the expert group. As many of the actions take effect only gradually, the report puts specific emphasis on identifying policy level actions that are likely to affect the emission until 2025 and beyond. So emphasis is put on best practices and projects where states can highlight success, progress and lesson learned in reducing emission, and of course implementing mitigation strategy for particular sources and sectors. The cooperation between different fora, as with the OECD, is also of high importance, and we need to complement the work of each other and avoid duplications. The OECD report also highlights the connection of different policy areas to reduce black carbon. It is both an air quality issue and a climate issue. The expert group also has put focus on these linkages between actions and policies to address emissions of black carbon and methane that are often encompassed in broader cross-cutting initiatives, since methane and black carbon, of course, contribute to climate change and poor air quality. And therefore, we often find policy regarding reduction in these policy areas. Well, the summary report is now being finalized and will be presented at the Arctic Council Ministerial Meeting in Reykjavik in May. And I would like to use the opportunity to urge you all to familiarize yourself with the report. It will include many interesting examples of best practices and national policies to curb black carbon and methane emission, and also the status on how we are doing towards reaching the collective goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Árnadóttir. And now we turn over to the incoming chair of the EGBCM, Ms. Veronika Ginsburg from the Russian Federation. Ms. Ginsburg, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation and for the presentation of this very important and timely report of the OECD. I believe that it is very important and interesting information for the realizations of future plans and the current activity of the expert group and Arctic Council countries as well. Climate benefit, local and global, is indicated among main messages of the report, As a final point, however, in the aspect of black carbon and methane, air pollution reduction influence on climate could be one of the most important consequences. The Arctic region is much more sensitive to climate change and is very important in the aspect of global climate change process. Black carbon as one of short-lived climate forces is very important for global temperature regulations and very critical for Arctic region. However, both the species, black carbon and methane, are very unique in this context because they are in the middle of the interest of the problematic of climate, air quality, and human health. The main themes of the Russian future chairmanship, as it was announced by the Russian ambassador, Mr. Nikolai Korchnov, will be the sustainable development with combined social, environmental, and economic compounds in a balanced way. It is emphasized the importance of promoting the previously agreed agenda, avoiding conflicting and inefficient duplication to act in a cross-sectoral and interdisciplinary manner. In this aspect, I believe that this report on economic benefits of air quality improvement in Arctic Council countries is very important for ensuring social, environment, and economic balance. It is very important to underline that integrated climate and air pollution policies can further reduce emission as well as reduce the greenhouse gases so that these two processes are going in parallel, and because of many of the sources of greenhouse gases emissions are also the same as sources of air pollution emissions. According to the conception of the Russian chairmanship in the Arctic Council for the next years, the program is divided into the 4 priority areas. Arctic inhabitants, indigenous people, including human capital development, Arctic youth, culture and sport, environment, climate change, marine environment protection, biodiversity, and Arctic seas, socioeconomic growth, including economic and infrastructural development and tourism, and strengthening the Arctic Council and scientific cooperation. Some of the topics are very horizontal in nature and affect the competence of several groups at once. And I believe that black carbon and methane is also a very horizontal issue, which is related at least 3 or 4 priorities. In the future plan of expert group of black carbon and methane, Russia is preparing to chair this group and to implement the target and project to implement recommendation of the expert group in order to achieve the collective goal to reduce black carbon and methane emission in Arctic. We are planning to pay attention to the improvement of methodological approaches, comprehensive of coverage and structuring the data on black carbon and methane emission to assess the state trends and projection of emissions in order to achieve the collective goal of reducing emissions in the Arctic. The countries of the North Arctic Council and other organizations in the Arctic region are now playing a leading role to achieve studying the impact of black carbon and on climate, environment, and health, as well as inventory of emissions and voluntary contributions to the reduction of black carbon emissions. We believe that results of the OECD report will be very important for the realizations of the future plans of the EGBSM group and countries' ambitions plans to reduce of black carbon and methane emission. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ginsburg, and let me just say that we look very much forward to your able leadership of the EGBCM during the Russian chairmanship. We are very happy that you have agreed to take on this important task. Now we turn to the questions and answers session. We have over 100 participants with us here today, and the way to do this is to use the chat room to write in your questions. The chat room is visible to all of our panelists. I will try to make some kind of order within this and try to direct it, but our panelists can of course also raise their hand if there is a particular point that they see in the chat room that they would like to respond to. And in addition to our speakers here today, we have added also, or we have with us also here today, Mr. Sig Clement from the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and Ms. Rita van Dingenen from the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. And maybe while you are all sort of finding your keyboards, dear participants, and start firing away your questions, I would maybe just want to start with one follow-up question to Mr. Agrawala. And I noted that in your presentation at the end, you talked about the ambitious policy actions in the Arctic, within the Arctic Council and states and the observer states. But you also talked about a scenario with ambitious policies implemented globally. And I would maybe like to ask you to elaborate a little bit on the main differences in impacts of these two scenarios. On one hand, focusing on the Arctic states and the observer states, and on the other hand, focusing on global action. And while you are speaking, I ask you all that you might have questions or comments, use the chat room to get them across to us. And let me also tell you that I will allow this event to run a little bit over time since we had technical challenges in the beginning. So at least until 5 or 10 minutes past the hour, we will continue. Mr. Agrawala, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. So yes, we in fact looked at 3 sets of scenarios: Arctic Council countries acting by themselves, Arctic Council countries plus the observers, and then Arctic Council countries, observers, and the rest of the world. To get to the bottom line, I think the biggest difference is between the Arctic Council countries acting alone and Arctic Council countries plus the observers, because you get some major economies and heavily populated countries involved by engaging the observer states. And this is where you see a big jump. If you look at the welfare benefits, for example, of ambitious action, then Arctic Council plus observers leads to much higher, significantly higher welfare benefits if the 2 groups act together as opposed to the Arctic Council countries acting alone. There is an additional benefit when we go, obviously, from the group of Arctic Council plus observers to the rest of the world. But I think as a first step, I think I would like to highlight that it's absolutely critical if there's a way to leverage ambitious action within the cluster of the Arctic Council countries and the observer states.
Thank you, Mr. Agrawala. And maybe just to follow up on this as well, I would be interested in hearing a little bit more from you about why the report is not focusing only on black carbon, but rather looking at reducing all air pollutants. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit upon that? Why go beyond black carbon?
Right. Now that's a very important question. So we were focusing on the economic consequences, And a lot of the economic consequences derive from impacts on labor productivity and also agricultural productivity. Those two impacts in turn depend upon concentrations of fine particulate matter and ground level ozone. Primarily, there are other pollutants involved as well. So black carbon is one important component of fine particulate matter, but we had to look at the entire suite of pollutants which contribute to ground level ozone and fine particulate matter. This is the reason to get at economic consequences through the impacts on health and agriculture. We had to look at the entire suite of pollutants to do a fairly comprehensive analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Agrawala. And now we are getting close to the designated end of this. But as I said, I will allow this to run a little bit over. I think I would now like to maybe pose a question and have you sort of take turns in trying to deal with that. All of our speakers today and the two additional guests from the group of the authors. And I would maybe formulate it so that we could say, that the report clearly shows the benefits of policy actions for air pollutants other than black carbon. I mean, how do you think this may stimulate further policy developments in the Arctic Council, within the Arctic Council and the OECD, and how can the Arctic Council and the OECD, through their work, influence the policies of their members? Maybe just trying to sort of do this in an organized manner, I would now maybe like to start with our two additions to the panel. Maybe if I would start with you, Mr. Sig Clement, if you have some short reflections on this, and then I will go over to Ms. Rita van Dingenen from the European Commission, and then back to our other speakers as well. So, Mr. Clement, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A very short reflection of that. I think that this report is demonstrating how practically available measures and tested possibilities to reduce emissions of black carbon and all associated pollutants can bring a lot of benefits. So I think that this is an important step to demonstrate that we do understand mitigation opportunities, and that experience can be used in designing further policies and leading to discussion, bringing in this mitigation. And I think just add one more sentence to what Dr. Agrawala was saying before. One of the reasons also to include this beyond black carbon, also other species, is that all of the mitigation measures, or vast majority of mitigation measures that are embedded in this integrated assessment framework that has been presented and used in this assessment, is actually acting on many of the species. It's very hard to take out just one pollutant. It's always a multi-pollutant question, and it means that there are positive and also some negative effects that we tried to consider, so trade-offs of some of the policies. And this is all systematically analyzed within the framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clement. And then over to you, Ms. Rita van Dingenen. You have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, I fully agree with what Sig Clement said. And what this report shows, again, after other studies that have been made in the past, is that these measures are no regret options. And what you do is take measures that are beneficial for climate and for health in the first place. And the second thing is that it's important to realize that pollution goes across the borders, and that international collaboration here leads to mutual benefits, and that working together as teams, as clubs, as a corporation of countries always leads to better results than individual countries. some maybe more technical remark I can say here is that our approach probably is still very conservative. With our model, we have estimated, let's say, a lower limit of the possible benefits, and there are many things and benefits that have not been taken into account yet. For instance, ecosystem services that we did not consider. Probably our health impacts are still at the lower side. If we look at more recent assessments from the global burden of disease, they tend to even increase the possible health benefit. So I think this is a very important piece of information that really provides strong incentives to all the countries involved to act on this and to get the benefits.
Thank you, Van Dingeren, and I would then move maybe over to the what we could say are the council representatives here, the representatives of the three chairmanships. If you would have some reflections on this, how the Arctic Council and OECD can influence policies of its members, and how we should how we can stimulate further policy developments. So for a short remarks on this, and probably as we are moving then towards conclusion as well, if there is anything sort of in conclusion that you want to add as well. So I'll do it now in the reverse order and offer Ms. Ginsburg to take the floor first, if you like. Ms. Ginsburg, do you want to comment upon this?
Yes, thank you very much. As I already mentioned, I think that the result of this report would be very important for the realization of the ambition plans of the Arctic Council countries in the realization of joint goal on the reduction of black carbon, and also probably in some additional measures in this aspect. Yes, and I think that of course it will be very useful in the future work of the expert group, and probably will be useful for the realizations of some address project on the reduction of black carbon and methane. And I would like once more to thank you for the organization of this important seminar, and for the preparation of this very useful and timely report.
Thank you, Ms. Ginsburg. And then over to the current chair, Ms. Árnadóttir, if you would care to comment upon this as well.
Yes, just a very short comment here. I think it is extremely important that this report highlights very well that we have the technology, we know that this is good for business, and in the Icelandic chairmanship we were of course highlighting the importance of greening the energy systems, and there we can see in a very concrete way how a very technical feasible option like changing from diesel-powered sources to heat houses or make electricity in smaller communities, and shifting over to greener options like wind, solar, or hydro. It is, of course, expensive in the short term, but the long-term gains are so strong, and we need to highlight these examples to words to show that acting short term and gaining long term is of course the way forward in these matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Árnadóttir. And then over to Finland, Mr. Kupiainen. You can be credited with sort of bringing the OECD into cooperation with us in the Arctic Council on this. So what can we do to even improve this tool of influencing policymakers further? Your thoughts on that, and if you also have any other last comments. You have the floor, Mr. Kupiainen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I think, first of all, it is key to bring many indicators to the table for us to support decision-making collectively, and of course, eventually then for each state to highlight whatever we want to do then within our countries. So, in fact, not before have we been encountered with such a well-packaged study towards the Arctic Council on economic indicators related to black carbon and air pollution. So this is very useful. And of course, we have to also, as a group, to study the results further and see indeed the linkages towards the recommendations, but that were highlighted by the current chair, Kristin Linda, and also of course the action items that we take from there. But let me also give a more member state view on how these policies or how this study could influence the policy of a state. I mean, this is a very useful element, and actually I think also a crucial element for us governments to look into, because now we will see clearly who will bear the costs of, or who will need to make the investments, and who will then bear the benefits. So obviously we see that it is not an easy gameplay, that it is not necessarily the same players in our societies that bear the cost and have the benefits. So therefore we need to have government interventions perhaps to foster these actions forward, and think about interventions that we could let's say help out and accelerate the investment side, because on the other hand the government will probably through the benefits achieve then reductions in costs. Some initial highlights here, and as a conclusion, nothing more than I already said in my intervention, but I also would warmly like to thank the Icelandic chairmanship and the OECD team and YASA and JRC for organizing this event, and also really look forward for reading in more detail the outcomes of this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kupiainen. And then we go over to you, Mr. Agrawala. I think it is only fitting that you will sort of have the last words on this, both on this question on how the Arctic Council and the OECD can further influence policies of its members. I know that the OECD very much has it as one of their main sort of objectives to influence the policies of their members, and you can take a lot of pride in that over the years. But how can we go about this particular topic? What can we do more? And also, if you have any further sort of final comments on this topic that we've been discussing here today. Over to you, Mr. Agrawala.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And I'd just like to thank the Arctic Council and the research teams that are working with various projects, because without their expertise, we could not have brought this additional economic angle on top of the very rich work they've already done. Now, in terms of going forward, I think we've taken a stab at certain economic consequences, but coming back to the important point that Dr. Van Dingenen made, we've not looked at all the potential benefits, and the literature on the other public health impacts, for example, of different air pollutants is already evolving. So there is a need to keep up with the developments, and this should not be a one-off effort. We have invested the capital over the last couple of years to develop these relationships, to improve our modeling toolkit. But there's a lot more we can do in terms of economic analysis and looking at a broader set of health impacts, looking at a broader set of pollutants also in that analysis would be one step where we can contribute to the agenda of the Arctic Council. Another thing is that OECD is not just economic analysis. We are also, I mean, our motto, as Ambassador you alluded to, is better policies for better lives. And we are a forum for exchange of best practices. So what the Arctic Council countries are doing in handling short-lived climate pollutants or on climate action can be brought forward to the OECD setting with a broader set of countries, which also includes as key members the key emerging economies to see how we can collectively increase the ambition both on air pollution and on climate change. And finally, we also do a lot of work on policies to stimulate innovation. I think if you talk about best available techniques and technologies, tomorrow's technologies, what kind of policies do we need? What kind of investments do we need? There's a lot of work we have done over the past decades in those areas of innovation and deployment of technologies. And that also could be brought forward to address the specific issue of both air pollution and climate change in the context of the Arctic. So thank you very much to the Icelandic presidency, to the Finnish presidency, and also the upcoming Russian presidency and the experts from YASA and JRC.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agrawala, and this marks the end of our event today. I would like to again thank both the Minister and Minister Thordarson and Director Lacey for their involvement. I think they both have had to leave us for other obligations by now, but I'm sure that we will be able to bring our thanks over to them. I thank our presenters and discussants here today and all the participants, but most of all, I thank the OECD for the great leadership that you have taken on this topic and all of the authors of this report. It's, as I said at the beginning, it's a very impressive body of work, and I really encourage people also get the report, get the highlights, and read through it. It's an excellent work, excellent presentation, very interesting, very sort of approachable. So a high level of praise for the report. And I direct people finally to go to the OECD website to learn more about the report and OECD work on air pollution and other topics. So with that, I thank you all for being with us here today and look forward to engaging with you in some other fora some later time. Thank you all. Goodbye.